So anyway, the counterattack came. From the pro-abortion people. I had been elected president of the National Right to Life and carried that through the decade of the 80s into the early 90s. And during that time, National Right to Life grew from 400,000 annual income to 15.5 million and became a major force in the U.S. here, I think, certainly also in the world. And our stuff was translated into 32 languages. But in any case, here they saw the handwriting on the wall, and they were losing. Our major argument had been, this is a baby. See the development and so forth? Abortion kills a baby. That's not good. And we had pretty well swung public opinion south of the border. Well, they had to counter this. So they called a major meeting in New York of all of the Planned Parenthood types, and they huddled for the better part of a year. How are we going to counter this anti-abortion tide? Well, they decided that they couldn't fight us on the level of, is it a baby? We won that one. In fact, almost all of the arguments they threw at us, illegal abortions and all the others, we had pretty well countered. So they came up with a new one. Choice. Yes, it's a baby, but a woman has the right to choose. We're in the early 90s now. And with this, a lot of the politicians who had been sitting on the fence thought that the millennium had come, that side was going to win, and they jumped. And this is a species of bird, we call them. They're mugwumps. They sit on the fence with their mug on one side and their wump on the other. In any case, they began to carry the day. So we then had to counterattack. We pulled together all of the pro-life groups, both sides of the border, and we said, what can we do to counter this? And so the answer we came up with was fairly clear. A woman has the right to choose, but what was the question, dear?
But her choice was, she's pregnant, that's a fact. Her only choice is, how's the baby coming out? Alive or dead? That's her only choice that you're giving her. And so we decided that to go beyond that, but they didn't let that bother them. They went right on with choice, that the woman had the right to choose.
So anyway, that's where it was in the 90s. We stabilized the situation, and we slowly began to pull ahead of them again. Into the 2000s, they came up then with one more idea.
And so we decided we would see if we could answer that choice. Well, we always, every year, we had an invitation to go to the University of Cincinnati, and we had a big class. And so we kind of used this class for our test group, you might say. And prior to when we decided we wanted to see how we could approach this, prior to this, we'd always, gone at a regular rate with the facts, with the baby and so on, and here's what abortion does. This time, we decided we'd go at it from a woman's point of view. And we said to them, that we ourselves felt for the woman, and that we understood her problems, and that we wanted merely to give women information so they wouldn't make that mistake. And then when we were done with explaining about abortion and answering questions, the questions built into the body of the talk, at the end, we went into post-abortion syndrome, because the big thing had been, it's safe, it doesn't bother a woman, she just goes on with her life. It's like having a tooth pulled. And so they were still peddling that kind of propaganda. So we went on to say what post-abortion syndrome is and how widespread it was. And you could just read the audience, the girls, the co-eds, you could read their faces almost. And as you started talking about post-abortion syndrome, some of them would be sliding further down into their chairs because you were speaking too closely to home. And you described how going in, it was very little counseling and they'd be fine and everybody thought it was great. But then afterwards, how did the woman feel? It took her maybe a couple months, maybe longer, but she felt regretful. She felt more morose at what she had done. She felt self-deprecating herself. She began to have maybe nightmares. She began to hear things like that suction machine that had gone on. She had many problems, and she began feeling terrible inside. And it took her a while to figure out what it was, and many of them took them a long time. But what did they do to get rid of that feeling? Many of them would take up alcohol. They'd become promiscuous. They'd be against men. They would feel very upset, but they didn't want to admit it. And looking back now, we were 10 years into the abortion debate before we could find the first woman who would come forward and on a platform say she'd had an abortion and was sorry. It was such a feeling of upset and guilt and remorse, and it took that long